A cruel daughter-in-law, a brutal cut in the night, and a defenseless mother. What happens when Sheikh Tariq discovers the humiliation his wife inflicted upon his own sleeping mother? Vengeance will be relentless. The soft touch of silk against her skin, once a familiar comfort, now felt like a shroud. Aisha awoke with a strange sensation, an unfamiliar lightness on her head. She raised a trembling hand to her hair, and what she found made her heart stop. Instead of the silvery cascade that for years had been her crown of dignity, her fingers brushed against unruly, uneven strands, brutally, crudely cut. A shiver ran down her spine. Her body reacted before her mind could process the full extent of the cruelty. She rose from the bed, her frail body trembling, and stumbled to the ebony mirror. The reflected image was a direct blow to her soul. Her hair, once long and carefully braided for the night, was now tangled and short, with uneven strands hanging haphazardly around her face. It wasn't just a cut, it was an act of desecration. A silent scream tore at her throat, but no sound escaped. Aisha covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes brimming with tears that streamed uncontrollably, mingling with the wrinkles on her weary face. The humiliation was a poison spreading through every cell of her being. The morning sun already peeked through the heavy curtains, but for Aisha, the world had plunged into an icy darkness. She felt exposed, violated in her most sacred intimacy. How could she, the respected matriarch, show herself like this? The image of her daughter-in-law, Zara, with that perverse smile and eyes gleaming with malice, flashed in her mind. There was no doubt about the perpetrator of that vile act. It was Zara's signature, the mark of her ruthless contempt. A subtle creak of the bedroom door made Aisha startle. It was one of the maids, Fatima, bringing morning tea. The young woman's eyes, usually filled with discreet sweetness, widened upon seeing Lady Aisha. The silver teapot clinked in her hands, and steam escaped from the cup that almost fell to the floor. Fatima quickly averted her gaze, shame and compassion etched on her face. Aisha, a lump in her throat, gestured for the maid to withdraw, covering what remained of her hair with a scarf she had hastily grabbed. The silence that followed Fatima's departure was more deafening than any scream. Shortly after, a murmur began to echo through the mansion's corridors, breaking the morning's quiet. Hasty voices, hurried footsteps scurrying back and forth. Aisha, still sitting on the edge of the bed, tried to decipher the reason for such commotion. Then she heard a familiar voice, sharp and full of false joy, which could only belong to Zara. "Prepare everything! Sheikh Tariq is arriving! He called! He's already on his way!" The name of her son, Sheikh Tariq, reverberated in Aisha's ears like distant thunder. A wave of shock hit her, followed by a pang of panic. Tariq was returning, the man who regarded his mother's honor as his own blood. How would he react upon seeing the humiliation his wife had inflicted? Fear mingled with a faint spark of hope, the hope that finally justice might find its way through the opulent corridors of that mansion. Outside, a deep, distant roar began to grow, increasingly potent. The unmistakable sound of Tariq's car engine approached, the crunch of tires on the gravel of the mansion's long driveway intensifying. Aisha felt the ground tremble slightly, not from physical vibration, but from the anticipation of an encounter that would change everything. The Sheikh was home. The roar of Tariq's car engine erupted into the main courtyard, a sound of power and return that made the mansion's windows vibrate. Doors opened hurriedly, servants and maids forming an almost military line, as Zara, with a radiant smile and a silk dress that accentuated every curve, rushed to meet him. Her arms extended, enveloping Sheikh Tariq in an effusive embrace, her mellifluous voice echoing in the air. "My love, you've arrived, what indescribable joy!" she exclaimed, kissing him repeatedly on the face. Tariq tall and imposing in his traditional robes, returned the embrace with a cordiality that didn't match Zara's passion. His eyes, which swept the courtyard with a calculating intensity, fixed on the bustle of the servants before returning to his wife. "Zara, it's good to be home," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Where is my mother?" Zara's smile faltered for an almost imperceptible instant. "Ah, your mother. She's resting, my dear. She had a bit of a restless night, you know how it is. Age." She made a vague gesture with her hand, trying to minimize Aisha's absence. "But she'll be radiant to see you when she wakes." Tariq frowned slightly. He knew his mother. Aisha would never miss the chance to be the first to greet him. A pang of unease began to form in his chest. "I see. Let me go up to see her then, just for a moment." "No, no," Zara quickly intervened, her voice a little louder than necessary. "She's truly exhausted. It's better to let her sleep. You must be tired from your journey. Come, breakfast is laid out, and there's so much news to tell." She gently pulled him by the arm, guiding him further into the mansion, away from the wing where Aisha resided. As he was led away, Tariq's eyes caught a subtle movement. Fatima, the young maid who served Aisha, stood near the kitchen door, her eyes downcast, but her rigid posture betrayed attention. When their gazes met, for a fraction of a second, Tariq noticed an expression of anguish and veiled dread on the maid's face before she abruptly looked away, as if caught red-handed. That ignited a silent alarm in the sheikh's mind. Upstairs, Aisha heard everything. Every word from Zara, every step of Tariq, every sound of his arrival resonated in her room. Her heart beat erratically, a drum of fear and hope. She stood, covering her cut hair with a silk scarf that barely managed to conceal the extent of the desecration. Her fingers brushed against the short, uneven strands, and a wave of shame washed over her again. How could she present herself like this to her son, the pride of her life? Zara was lying. Aisha knew Tariq would realize, but what if he didn't? What if Zara's manipulation was too strong? The idea of exposing herself, of revealing the cruelty she had suffered, was almost as terrifying as the cruelty itself. Tariq followed Zara to the dining room, the aroma of fresh coffee and spices wafting through the air. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, but his mind was far from the sumptuous dishes, his mother's absence, Zahra's flimsy excuse, Fatima's apprehensive gaze. Something was wrong. The atmosphere felt heavy. Despite his wife's false joviality, he felt a prickle on the back of his neck, as if a secret hung in the air, dense and oppressive. "So, my love," Zara began, serving him tea with her jewel-adorned hands, "you won't believe what happened with our neighbor, Lady Al-Fahad." Tariq barely heard Zara's ramblings. His eyes, which had previously swept the courtyard, now scanned the faces of the servants serving breakfast, searching for any hint, any clue. He felt he was on a chessboard, and the pieces were not where they should be. The sheikh, accustomed to deciphering political plots and state secrets, sensed that a much more personal and dangerous enigma awaited his attention in the corridors of his own home. The truth, he knew, was an elusive creature, but it always left traces, and he was beginning to see them. Tariq could barely disguise his disinterest in the neighborhood gossip. Zara's tone of voice, once mellifluous, now sounded forced, almost hysterical in her attempt to fill the silence with trivialities. He observed her, not with the attention of an enamored husband, but with the cold analysis of a strategist. The gleam in her eyes was feverish, and her fingers drummed on the rim of her teacup, a nervous tic she tried to conceal. He swept his gaze across the servants moving silently through the dining room. Their faces were tense, their movements restrained. No one dared to meet his eyes. It was the kind of silence that preceded a storm, the kind of forced obedience that hid a painful secret. The air felt denser, impregnated with a collective anxiety. "Forgive me, Zara," Tariq interrupted, his voice calm, but with an unquestionable authority that made Zara freeze. The journey was indeed long. I feel I need a little fresh air before I dedicate myself to all these matters. Please continue your breakfast. I'll be back shortly. Before she could protest, Tariq stood. The scrape of his chair on the marble echoed through the silent room. He headed for the door, not towards the courtyard, but into the mansion's inner corridors. His steps were firm, decisive, each one a silent declaration of his intent. Zara watched him leave, the mask of false joy crumbling on her face. An uncontrollable tremor ran through her body. She knew Tariq's excuse was merely a smokescreen. He wasn't looking for fresh air, he was looking for the truth. Tariq walked through the opulent corridors, the wealth around him seeming empty and cold. He noticed Fatima's absence from the dining room. His mind, sharpened by years of palace intrigues, connected the dots. The maid's terrified gaze, Zara's haste to keep him away from his mother, the flimsy excuse about Aisha's tiredness. He found Fatima in the pantry, the subtle sound of dishes being arranged revealing her presence. She startled when he entered, dropping a stack of linen napkins she was holding, her eyes wide with fear, fixed on him, and she bowed in a hasty reverence. "Fatima." Tariq's voice was low, almost a whisper, but laden with a gravity that made her tremble. "Is my mother well?" The maid hesitated, her lips trembling. She glanced around as if the walls could hear. The air in the pantry seemed thin. Zara's fear was palpable, but loyalty to Aisha struggled to emerge. "Sheikh, Lady Aisha, she is not." "Well," Fatima stammered, her words barely audible. She does not want to be seen." "To be seen, Fatima," Tariq pressed, taking a step forward. His eyes never left hers, searching for the truth behind her hesitation. "Tell me, what happened to my mother?" Tears welled in Fatima's eyes. She clasped her hands against her chest, her face pale. "I cannot, Sheikh. I cannot." A silent roar began to grow within Tariq. Caution gave way to a rising fury. He knew Fatima couldn't speak openly, but her pain and terror were a confession in themselves. "Take me to her, Fatima," he ordered, his voice now a firmer tone. "Now." Fatima, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a terrible secret, nodded. She guided him through the corridors, her steps light and hurried, almost furtive. The silence in the mansion seemed to amplify the sound of their own beating hearts. They reached the door to Aisha's room. Fatima stopped, nodding towards the closed door, unable to go further. Her eyes pleaded for understanding and forgiveness. Tariq nodded, a grim understanding settling in his chest. He opened the door carefully, the soft creak of the hinges breaking the quiet of the room. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back hunched and her head covered by a silk scarf that couldn't quite conceal the irregular shape of something beneath, was his mother. The morning light streamed through the windows, but Aisha seemed enveloped in a deep shadow. The fragility of her posture, the way her shoulders trembled slightly, everything screamed a pain that went beyond the physical. "Mother!" Tariq's voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Aisha startled, turning slowly. When her eyes met his, a silent scream of shame and despair tore across her face. Her hand flew to the scarf, pressing it even tighter against her head. But it was too late. The scarf slipped slightly, and Tariq saw. It wasn't just a cut. It was a mutilation. Strands of silver hair, once long and carefully combed, now hung in brutal, uneven lengths, as if they had been torn out or hacked with a dull knife. What remained was a testament to cruelty, a violated symbol of her dignity. The air in the room seemed to freeze. The sound of Tariq's breathing was the only noise. He saw the humiliation in his mother's eyes, the unspeakable pain, the shame that consumed her. His own eyes widened in shock, and then, in a cold, overwhelming fury. Aisha, with a muffled sob, extended a trembling hand to him, her eyes pleading for something she couldn't verbalize. Tariq knelt beside the bed, the image of desecration etched in his mind. He took his mother's hand, feeling the fragility of her bones. His fury was a fire beginning to consume everything in its path. The truth was no longer a trace, it was a visible scar, a silent scream echoing in his soul. The promise of justice, once a spark, now blazed in his eyes with terrifying intensity. Zara had gone too far, and Sheikh Tariq was home. Tariq's hand tightened around his mother's, the fragility of her bones, a stark contrast to the fury boiling within him. His eyes, once filled with shock, hardened into icy determination. The sight of Aisha's hair, a tangle of brutally shorn strands, was an open wound in his soul. It wasn't just an outrage, it was an attack on honor, a desecration of his mother's dignity. "Mother!" Tariq's voice was a hoarse whisper, but the intensity was unmistakable. He knelt, holding her hands firmly. "Who did this to you?" Aisha, her shoulders hunched and body trembling, tried to avert her gaze, shame still consuming her, but Tariq gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. In his eyes, she saw not judgment, but deep pain and a silent promise of retribution. "You don't need to say a word, my mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you suffered, and I swear by all that is sacred that whoever did this will pay." Aisha's tears, previously held back, now streamed freely down her aged face. She didn't need to speak. The relief of having her son there, the security in his touch, was a torrent of emotions that momentarily freed her from fear. She squeezed his hand in response, a gesture worth more than 1,000 words. Tariq remained kneeling for a moment, absorbing his mother's pain and transforming it into an unbreakable resolve. He stood, his posture erect and imposing, but the expression on his face was dark, dangerous. Aisha, who had cowered under the weight of her humiliation, felt a renewed strength upon seeing him. Her son's presence was a shield, a promise that the days of torment had come to an end. He turned to the door, where Fatima still stood, her eyes wide, fear still visible, but now mingled with a pang of hope. "Fatima," Tariq commanded, his voice calm, but with an authority that made the maid flinch slightly. "Stay with my mother. Do not leave her alone for an instant, and bring her something to eat and drink. She needs comfort." "Yes, Sheikh," Fatima replied, her voice barely audible, but she nodded vigorously, hurrying to Aisha's side. Tariq cast one last look at his mother, a gaze of affection and a promise of justice. Then he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The muffled click of the lock seemed like a seal on her fate. In the corridors, the mansion's atmosphere seemed to have shifted. The air, which had previously been merely dense with secrets, now felt charged with an electric energy, the anticipation of an inevitable event. Servants who saw him pass recoiled, their gazes quickly averting. The silence that followed him was heavy and oppressive. They sensed the change in the sheikh, the aura of danger that enveloped him. Tariq did not go to the dining room. He knew Zara would be there, perhaps still trying to maintain the facade of a perfect wife, but he was certain her mask was already beginning to crack. Instead, he headed to his study, a space lined with dark wood and ancient books, where the most important decisions were made. The sheikh sat at his large desk, but there were no papers or documents to review. His mind was clear, focused on a single objective. He picked up the satellite phone, a device that connected him directly to his most trusted and discreet contacts. "Prepare the jet for an emergency trip," he ordered, his voice low and controlled, "and contact the tribal council. I need a meeting as soon as possible, a matter of extreme family urgency." He hung up, the click echoing in the silence of the study. The decision was made. It wouldn't be a quick, impulsive confrontation. It would be a cold, calculated, and public justice, as his mother's honor demanded. Aisha's humiliation would be cleansed by the exposure of Zara's cruelty before all. Meanwhile, in the dining room, Zara grew increasingly restless. The tea had grown cold in her cup, and the sumptuous dishes that once pleased her now seemed insipid. Tariq had been gone too long. The fresh air excuse no longer fooled her. The mansion's silence, once a melody of order, was now a symphony of apprehension. She rose abruptly, the scrape of her chair grating against the silence. Her eyes swept the room, desperately searching for a servant who could give her some information. But the room was empty. The servants seemed to have evaporated. She knew something was wrong, that the game had changed. Suddenly, a subtle sound broke the silence. Firm, resolute footsteps approached from the corridor leading to Tariq's study. Zara's heart pounded, beating erratically in her chest. She tried to compose herself, but her hands trembled uncontrollably. The study door opened, and Tariq emerged. His eyes met hers across the distance, and what Zara saw there made her catch her breath. There was no explicit anger, no uncontrolled fury. There was only a cutting coldness, an unwavering resolve that was far more terrifying. Sheikh Tariq, the man she thought she controlled, was back. And he wasn't looking at his wife, but at a criminal who had committed an unforgivable act. A distant thunder broke the silence, making the windows vibrate. The storm was just beginning. But the true tremor that ran through the mansion emanated from Tariq's eyes. They met Zara's, and in them there were no traces of the passionate husband nor the patient leader. There was only the icy stillness of a judge who had already delivered his verdict. Zara tried to smile, a conditioned reflex from years of dissimulation, but the gesture crumbled before it even formed. A chill ran down her spine, more intense than any cold breeze. The air in the dining room grew dense, heavy with unspoken truth. "Tariq, my love," she began, her voice sounding artificially sweet, trying to fill the icy vacuum between them. "Where have you been? The tea has grown cold." He did not respond with words. Instead, he took a slow step towards her, each movement deliberate, measured. Zara recoiled instinctively, a primal terror beginning to gnaw at her insides. She felt the weight of his gaze, which seemed to see through her skin, her bones, to the darkness in her soul. "My mother is not well." Tariq's voice was a whisper, but it carried the force of a rock. "She has suffered greatly." Zara's blood seemed to freeze in her veins. She tried to maintain her composure, but her hands trembled visibly. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry to hear that. Age, perhaps. Or perhaps the stress of your long absence." A dry, humorless laugh escaped Tariq's lips. "Stress from my absence? Or stress from your presence, Zara?" Zara's mask of innocence began to crack. I don't understand what you mean." "You don't understand." Tariq took another step, further closing the distance between them. "Allow me to be clearer. Your mother-in-law, my mother, was humiliated. Her dignity was attacked. A symbol of her honor was desecrated." Zara swallowed hard. Her eyes swept the room, desperately searching for an escape route, an excuse, anything. But there was nothing. The mansion seemed to have become a labyrinth, and she was trapped. "I swear, Tariq, I know nothing," she stammered, her voice failing. "I always treated your mother with the utmost respect. Ask the servants." "I already have asked," Tariq said, his eyes fixed on hers. "Not with words, but with their silence. With the fear in their eyes, with the pain my mother could not hide. The truth, Zara, is a river that always finds its way to the sea." A pang of panic struck her. He knew, he truly knew. That cold gaze, the absence of explicit anger, was far worse than any scream. It meant he had already processed the information, and his decision was already made. "What do you intend to do, Tariq?" she asked, her voice barely a thread, desperation beginning to show. "Do?" Tariq arched an eyebrow, a gesture she once found charming, but which was now terrifying. "Justice will be done, Zara. Not a hasty, impulsive justice, but a justice that honors my mother's dignity and exposes the cruelty of whoever harmed her. He approached close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, but his eyes remained cold as ice. I have prepared the jet. The tribal council has been summoned. They will hear the truth, and they will judge. The color drained from Zara's face. The tribal council. That was worse than any punishment she could imagine. It was public dishonor, the ruin of her name, the loss of everything she had built. "You can't do this," she exclaimed, her voice rising in hysterical panic. "I am your wife, the mother of your children. Think of the family's reputation." "Did you think of the family's reputation when you cut my mother's hair while she slept?" Tariq asked, his voice remaining chillingly calm. "Did you think of honor when you turned her into an object of scorn? No. You thought only of your own pleasure in inflicting pain." He stepped back, turning his back to her. "Your belongings will be packed. You will have time to prepare for the journey. Do not try to flee. Do not try to contact anyone. Every door, every window, every phone is under surveillance." Zara staggered, feeling the floor spin beneath her feet. Where am I going?" Tariq stopped at the threshold of the door without turning. "To where justice takes you, and to where my mother's dignity demands you go." The sound of his firm footsteps echoed down the corridor as he walked away, leaving Zara alone in the dining room, surrounded by the oppressive silence and the cold scent of forgotten tea. The mansion she had ruled with an iron fist was now her prison. Outside, another thunderclap rumbled, closer this time, and rain began to fall in torrents, washing the outside world as the storm settled within the walls of the opulent residence. Tariq's storm. Zara stood still, the world around her spinning in an icy vortex of terror. The silence Tariq left behind was more deafening than any scream, a vacuum that swallowed her dignity and power. The cold scent of forgotten tea seemed a bitter reminder of her former life, now undone. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, not her own, but any, as if the distinction no longer mattered. Her hands trembled, no longer just from fear, but from an uncontrollable tremor that ran through her. Tariq's words echoed in her mind, each one a hammer delivering fatal blows to her future. Tribal Council. The phrase was a phantom, a condemnation far beyond any physical prison. It was social death, immutable shame. She looked at the door through which he had exited, as if expecting him to reappear, for it all to be a nightmare. But the door remained closed, a merciless seal on her new reality. The sound of the rain outside intensified, beating against the windows with a fury that seemed to want to invade the mansion, stripping bare its secrets. A lightning flash illuminated the room for an instant, revealing the distorted reflection of her own face in the glass, pale, eyes wide with panic. "It can't be," she whispered into the void, her voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "He wouldn't do this. He loves me. I am the mother of his children." But the logic of her despair collided with the cold resolve she had seen in Tariq's eyes. Love had been replaced by relentless justice, and motherhood by a crime against honor. A movement at the periphery of her vision made her startle. A figure emerged from the kitchen door, one of the servants Tariq had questioned with silence. It was no longer the same submissive servant as before. His eyes, once downcast, now watched her with a mixture of caution and a contained satisfaction, almost imperceptible but present. Another servant appeared, and then another, all of them avoiding her direct gaze. But their presences were an invisible fence, a reminder of the surveillance Tariq had promised. Zara tried to stand, intending to confront them, to re-establish her authority, but her legs were weak. The voice she tried to project failed, and the words were lost in a choke. She was no longer the lady of the house. She was a prisoner in her own gilded cage. Meanwhile, in his study, Tariq watched the rain through the window, the drops running down like tears on a glass face. The sound of the storm was a distant echo of his own inner tempest, now contained, channeled towards a singular purpose. He had acted, but the pain in his heart for his mother's betrayal and humiliation was a heavy burden. He called one of his most loyal lieutenants, Khalid, his voice calm and firm. "Khalid, ensure that no contact is made with the outside. No one is to enter or leave without my permission, and prepare accommodations for the tribal council. They will arrive at dawn." "Yes, Sheikh." Khalid's voice came from the other end of the line, laden with respect and a tacit understanding of the gravity of the situation. "Everything will be arranged." Tariq hung up, the image of his mother, fragile and humiliated, still vivid in his mind. Justice would be cold, yes, but not without compassion for those who deserved it. Aisha would be restored to her honor, and Zara would face the consequences of her cruelty. There would be no escape. In the dining room, Zara finally managed to stand, but not to flee. She walked to the window, watching the relentless rain. The world outside was a grey blur, and the world within her was collapsing. Her eyes fell upon a small hand mirror she had left on a side table. She picked it up, and her own reflection stared back at her. It wasn't the image of the powerful, confident woman she knew. It was the image of someone who had lost everything and whose downfall was just beginning. The storm outside continued to rage, and Zara knew that, for her, the worst was yet to come. The tribal council's judgment would not merely be a matter of lost status. It would be the loss of her very identity. The image staring back at her from the hand mirror was not that of Zara, the lady of the mansion, the woman who controlled lives with a glance. It was a pale spectre, eyes devoid of power, lips trembling in a silent plea. The mirror slipped from her trembling hands, hitting the marble floor with a dry thud, but not breaking. A reflection of her own shattered resilience, she thought, a cruel irony. The silence Tariq had left behind was a heavy, suffocating shroud. Every echo of his firm footsteps down the corridor still resonated in Zara's mind, a relentless reminder of the pronounced sentence. She moved through the dining room like a ghost, her hands brushing against the luxurious furniture. Once symbols of her dominion, now mere objects in her prison. The mansion, once her kingdom, had transformed into a gilded cage. The rain outside, which had previously roared with tempestuous fury, began to subside, its drumming on the window becoming softer, almost a lament. But the storm within Zara only intensified. She tried to think, tried to devise a plan, but her mind was in a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. The tribal council. The word was a poison, corroding any remnant of hope. It wasn't just the loss of her status. It was the loss of her very essence. She approached one of the windows, looking out at the drenched garden. The trees swayed gently in the post-rain breeze, and the air carried the damp scent of earth. The world outside continued, indifferent to her ruin. One of the servants, the same one who had observed her earlier, passed down the corridor, his footsteps now audible without the former reverent silence. He did not look at her, but Zara felt the change. Obedience had been replaced by cold surveillance, a transferred loyalty. She was no longer feared, she was simply controlled. While Zara drowned in her despair, Tariq operated with the cold precision of a surgeon. In his study, the soft light of a desk lamp illuminated piles of documents and maps. He felt no joy, only a grim determination. The image of his mother, with tear-filled eyes and disfigured hair, was a relentless engine for his pursuit of justice. "Khalid," he said into the phone, his voice calm but with unquestionable authority. "Are the preparations complete? They will arrive in a few hours." "Yes, Sheikh," Khalid replied, his voice laden with respect. The jet is ready for the journey, and the accommodations for the tribal council have been inspected. No fault, I assure you. Security is tripled. No one approaches the mansion without your express permission. Good, Tariq murmured, his eyes fixed on a distant point. And my mother, is she comfortable? Has she been informed about the council's arrival? Aisha is in her chambers, Sheikh. She is receiving all necessary care. We have informed her about the council. Yes, she is. At peace. There is a serenity in her gaze, Sheikh. The word peace brought a brief, painful relief to Tariq's heart. His mother deserved peace, deserved honor. He hung up the phone, the silence of the study filled only by the soft crackle of the fire in the fireplace. He stood, walking to the window. The rain had ceased completely, and the first lights of dawn were beginning to paint the sky a pale blue-gray. The night air was still cool, but the promise of a new day hung on the horizon. This day would bring the judgment. Zara felt the first ray of sun peek through the heavy dining room curtains. The light brought no warmth, only exposed the coldness of her situation. She heard the distant sound of approaching engines. It wasn't a single car, but a motorcade. The sound grew, filling the air with a low, powerful vibration. It was the council. They were arriving. Her heart began to pound uncontrollably, a frantic drum in her chest. Her eyes swept the room, desperately searching for something, anything, but there was nowhere to go. No way to hide. The mansion, once her refuge, had now become the stage for her humiliation. The vehicle stopped at the main entrance, and the sound of doors opening and low, serious voices began to echo from outside. Zara's breath caught in her throat. She was about to face the truth, no longer hidden, no longer denied. Tariq's justice had arrived. The sound of the engines had ceased, replaced by the shuffle of heavy footsteps and the low murmur of voices approaching the mansion's main entrance. For Zara, every sound was a hammer blow to her chest, an echo of the condemnation that was being announced. Her eyes were fixed on the massive dining room door, as if expecting it to open at any moment, revealing her fate. The air in the room seemed thin, making it difficult for her to breathe. A tense, heavy, suffocating silence fell over the mansion. Then, the oak dining room door opened slowly, not with the impetuosity Zara expected, but with a solemnity that was even more terrifying. Tariq stood there, his imposing figure filling the doorway, but he was not alone. Behind him, a procession of men entered the room. They were the elders of the tribal council, their traditional robes impeccable and their faces marked by age and wisdom. Each of them exuded an aura of unquestionable authority, their dark eyes sweeping the room with a gravity that made Zara shrink. They did not look directly at Zara, but their presence was a silent accusation. Their movements were slow and deliberate as they made their way to the long dining table, not to eat, but to take their places, transforming the opulent space into an impromptu tribunal. The scrape of the heavy wooden chairs echoed in the room, each sound amplifying Zara's panic. Zara tried to speak, tried to scream, perhaps even to beg, but her throat was dry, her voice trapped somewhere deep in her chest. Her eyes desperately sought a glimpse of compassion in any of the wrinkled faces, but found only cold, unwavering resolve. Tariq remained standing at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on Zara. There was no anger in his gaze, only deep sorrow and an iron determination. He nodded towards the door, and a servant moved to open it again. This time Aisha entered. The Sheikh's mother looked different. Though still frail, there was a new dignity in her posture, a serenity Zara had never seen before. Her eyes, once always downcast and full of fear, now lifted with a remarkable stillness. She was wrapped in a simple shawl that covered her head, but a glimpse of her recently cut hair, now short and uneven, escaped from beneath the fabric. It was not the long, respectable hair Zara had desecrated. It was a visible symbol of the outrage, an open wound for all to see. Aisha did not look at Zara. Her eyes met Tariq's, and a small smile of gratitude and relief passed over her lips. Tariq led her to a chair beside him, and she sat, her movements calm, but every gesture laden with a stillness that screamed pain and resilience. Zara felt a wave of nausea. The contrast between Aisha's silent dignity and her own terror was unbearable. She was the accused, and the living proof of her cruelty sat mere feet away, bearing witness without a single word. One of the elders, a man with a white beard and piercing eyes, cleared his throat, and the sound reverberated in the silent room. He looked at Tariq, who nodded. "We are here today," the elder began, his voice grave and resonant, "to restore the honor that was stolen and to judge the transgression that has stained the walls of this sacred house." With each word, the floor seemed to collapse beneath Zara's feet. She was no longer the lady, the controller. She was the defendant, stripped bare before a relentless judgment, and the truth which she had tried to bury was now exposed to the cold, merciless light of dawn. The verdict was only beginning to be pronounced, but Zara already felt the overwhelming weight of her downfall. The elder's words hung in the air, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile edifice of Zara's defiance. She felt the ground beneath her feet disappear, replaced by an abyss of despair. Cold sweat trickled down her neck and her hands clenched, nails digging into the flesh of her palms. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The elder, with his white beard and piercing gaze, paused dramatically before continuing, allowing the weight of his initial words to settle. The dining room, once a stage for banquets and laughter, was now a sanctuary of solemn silence, broken only by Zara's heavy breathing. "A mother's honor," the elder continued, his voice grave and resonant, "is the foundation of our community. To outrage it is to dismantle the very structure of our tradition and respect. Aisha, the mother of our sheikh, has been subjected to humiliations that shame us all." His eyes turned to Aisha, who remained seated with an almost ethereal stillness. Her gaze, once so timid, now carried the depth of an ocean of contained pain, but also a newfound fortitude. The shawl covering her head could not completely hide the irregular outline of her cut hair, a living, silent testament to Zahra's cruelty. The image was a punch to Zahra's gut, making her blood run cold. Aisha didn't need to say a word. Her mere presence was an accusation more powerful than any speech. "The final act of contempt," the elder continued, and his voice hardened. "The cutting of her hair while she slept was not merely a physical attack, but an assault on her dignity, her identity, a symbol of respect transformed into scorn in utter disregard for culture and the bonds of blood." Zara felt a wave of dizziness. The room's walls seemed to close in on her, and the air grew thin. She wanted to scream, to deny, to hurl accusations back, but her voice was nothing more than a hoarse whisper in her mind. She could not deny the truth that lay before them, exposed for all to see, embodied in Aisha's serene yet wounded countenance. Tariq remained beside his mother, a rock of determination. His eyes met Zara's, and she saw there not the fury she expected, but a deep disappointment, a sorrow that cut deeper than any scream. It was the sorrow of a betrayed son, of a man who saw his family torn apart by the hands of one who should have protected it. Another elder, younger but with the same seriousness in his gaze, leaned forward. "Zara," he said, his tone slightly less formal but equally relentless. "Do you have anything to say in your defense? The evidence is before us, and Aisha's pain is palpable. Can you justify your actions?" Zara opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her gaze swept across the stern faces of the councillors, then to Tariq, and finally to Aisha. For a brief instant she thought of pleading, of falling to her knees and begging for forgiveness, but pride, though mortally wounded, held her back. A sudden wave of anger, born of desperation, washed over her. "There's nothing to justify," she managed to stammer, her voice trembling. but with a remnant of her former authority. She was always a burden, a shadow. I was just trying to maintain order in this house. The words came out disjointed, without the conviction she had hoped for. The elders exchanged glances, and their faces remained impassive, their expressions unaltered by Zara's pathetic attempt to defend herself. A low, disapproving murmur spread among them. Tariq made a small nod, and the lead elder intervened again. "Order," he repeated, the word laden with irony. "Order achieved through cruelty and humiliation is not order, it is tyranny." He made a gesture with his hand, and a servant approached with an ancient scroll of parchment. The sound of the paper unrolling echoed in the silent room. The elder held it in his wrinkled hands, his eyes scanning the lines of ancestral script. "The laws of our people are clear," he declared, his voice reaching a final tone. "The punishment for dishonoring a family member, especially an elder, is severe, and for tyranny within one's own home, the consequences are irreversible." The word irreversible was not just a sound. It was a dry blow that resonated through the dining room walls, an echo of the unfolding sentence. Zara felt the air sucked from her lungs. Her legs gave way, and she had to lean on the edge of the table, her fingertips white from the pressure. The pride that had kept her upright crumbled, revealing a crater of panic and despair. The lead elder, with the parchment still in his wrinkled hands, raised his gaze. His eyes, which had witnessed generations of conflicts and resolutions, fixed on Zara with a gravity that brooked no argument. "Zara, you have dishonored the mother of our sheikh, violated the sacred bonds of family, and imposed your will with cruelty and contempt. By the tribal council and in the name of justice and honor, we declare the following verdict." A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Even the scrape of chairs seemed to have ceased. Zara's ragged breathing was the only audible sound, a hoarse whisper of terror. "You shall be stripped of your title as wife of Sheikh Tariq. Your marriage is dissolved. You shall be banished from this house and from all the lands of our clan. Your assets and possessions, acquired during your time here, shall be confiscated and redistributed in the name of the community and justice. You shall have no more voice, no influence, no place among us." The elder's voice was a soft thunder, but each word struck Zara like lightning. "Your existence from today forward shall be that of a stranger, nameless, homeless, without honor." Zara let out a muffled cry, a mixture of fury and despair. "No! This is an outrage. You cannot do this. I am the Sheikh's wife. I am." Tariq, who until then had remained silent, stepped forward, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Zara. His eyes, once filled with sorrow, now gleamed with a cold, unwavering determination. "You were the Sheikh's wife, Zara," he said, his voice low, but laden with an authority that silenced any protest Zara might have had. "But you betrayed the trust, loyalty, and love that were given to you. You dishonored my mother, and in doing so, dishonored me and our entire family. The council has spoken, and their words are the law." Aisha, seated beside Tariq, lifted her gaze. Her eyes met Zara's for a brief instant. There was no triumph, only a deep sadness and a weariness that seemed to have been carried for years. It was the look of one who had survived a long and painful ordeal. Zara felt her blood boil in her veins. But her legs seemed not to obey her. The floor seemed to spin beneath her feet. She looked at the elders, at Tariq, at Aisha, searching for a sliver of clemency, a glimpse of humanity, but found nothing but resolute condemnation. Her life of luxury, power, and control had dissolved in the blink of an eye, reduced to ashes by her own actions. "Take her!" Tariq ordered, his voice firm. Two guards, who had remained discreetly near the door, stepped forward. Their footsteps were heavy and deliberate. Zara tried to recoil, but her legs were rooted, as if the very floor was swallowing her. She felt the guard's firm hands on her arms, pulling her. "No, let me go. I am the lady of this house," she screamed, her voice choked with panic, but now sounding empty and devoid of authority. She struggled, a last desperate act of defiance, but it was useless. The guard's strength was greater than her resistance. As she was dragged out of the dining room, Zara cast one last look at Tariq. Their eyes met, and she saw there not hatred, but a silent pain, a mourning for the woman he thought he knew and loved. Aisha, for her part, closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, as if an immense weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. The sound of Zara's footsteps, dragged and hesitant, echoed down the corridor as she was led out of the mansion. The dining room door closed with a dull thud, sealing not only the end of a judgment, but the end of an era of tyranny. The silence that followed was no longer tense and suffocating, but laden with a new quietude, a newfound peace that promised the restoration of honor and harmony. Tariq's justice had been delivered, cold and relentless, and the mansion, finally, could begin to breathe again. The last echo of Zara's desperate cries faded into the mansion's vastness, leaving behind a vacuum of silence that, for the first time in a long while, was not oppressive. The dining room door, which had closed with a dull thud, now seemed a portal to a new dawn, dispelling the dense shadow that had hung over everyone. The elders, whose faces had maintained an unwavering gravity during the judgment, now exuded an almost palpable relief. They rose slowly, their robes rustling, and one by one bowed respectfully to Tariq and, more notably, to Aisha. "Justice has been served, Sheikh Tariq," one of them said, his voice hoarse but laden with dignity. "May peace and honor return to this house." Tariq nodded, his expression still serious, but with the tension visibly lessened in his shoulders. "So be it. I am grateful for your wisdom and righteousness." The elders withdrew, their measured footsteps echoing down the corridor until they disappeared from view. The dining room, moments before a stage of intense drama, now emptied, leaving only Tariq and his mother. Aisha remained seated, her eyes still closed, a solitary tear tracing a path down her face, marked by time and pain. It was not a tear of sadness, but of deep exhaustion, the release of suffering held for years. She slowly opened her eyes and her gaze met Tariq's. There was no need for words. The weight in her chest, which had suffocated her for so long, finally dissipated, leaving a strange, almost light emptiness. Tariq knelt before her, his powerful figure bowed in humility and regret. He took his mother's wrinkled hands, which trembled slightly. "Mother," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I failed to protect you. Forgive me for not seeing, for not acting sooner." Aisha squeezed his hands. "My son," she said, her voice weak, but with a sweetness Tariq hadn't heard in years. "You did not fail. You acted with justice, and that is what matters. Honor has been restored. My heart finds peace." She touched his face, a gesture of affection that carried the weight of all the lost time. Tariq stood, helping his mother to her feet as well. Aisha, who had previously seemed bowed under the weight of the world, now straightened slightly, a thread of hope in her posture. He led her out of the dining room, not to her former modest chambers, but to a more luxurious and sunlit wing of the mansion. "Mother," he said, opening the door to a spacious, richly decorated room, with windows that opened onto a lush garden. "This is your new home. May it be a sanctuary of peace and happiness. Everything that was taken from you will be returned and more. From today forward, you will be treated with the respect and dignity you have always deserved." Aisha entered the room, her eyes sweeping over the beauty and comfort. A maid, with a gentle smile and eyes brimming with emotion, waited inside. She bowed deeply. "My lady, it is an honor to serve you again." Aisha looked at Tariq, and a small smile, the first genuine smile in a long time, touched her lips. The mansion still bore the scars of the recent past, but a fresh breeze of change was already blowing through its corridors. The whispers of fear and submission were beginning to be replaced by murmurs of hope and gratitude. The cleansing would not be merely of the chambers, but of the souls. Tariq knew that the journey to rebuild trust and heal wounds would be long. He had done what was right, but the emotional cost was immense. Watching his mother finally breathe freely, however, was the greatest reward. He promised himself that he would never again allow such cruelty to flourish under his roof. He bid farewell to Aisha, who was now sitting comfortably in a soft armchair, the maid offering her a cup of fragrant tea. As he walked away, the sheikh felt the weight of the mantle of responsibility on his shoulders, but also a lightness in his heart. The mansion had been purified, justice, though late, had prevailed, and with it, the promise of a new beginning for all who inhabited those ancient walls. The air of the mansion felt lighter, more breathable, as if the very building had freed itself from a heavy burden. The heavy veil of apprehension that had enveloped Tariq's mansion finally lifted, revealing a silence that was no longer tense but serene. Every breath within those walls seemed deeper, freer. The murmurs that were once of fear and submission now transformed into whispers of relief and gratitude, spreading through the corridors like a gentle breeze. In the luxurious room that was now hers, Aisha felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The maid, Fatima, whose tear-filled eyes still shone with the emotion of their reunion, helped her undress from her simple garments, replacing them with soft, fragrant fabric. Aisha touched the fabric, its softness a strange sensation on her skin, accustomed to roughness. She sat before a polished silver mirror, her reflection staring back at her. The marks of time and suffering were still there, deep, but there was something new in her gaze, a spark of restored dignity. Her eyes fixed on her hair, which had been the stage of the last and most cruel humiliation. Now it was uneven, the ends cut haphazardly, a vivid reminder of Zahra's malice. Fatima, noticing her lady's gaze, picked up a soft, bristled brush. "My lady, allow me to care for you," she whispered, her voice laden with tenderness. Aisha nodded, and as Fatima gently combed the strands, patiently untangling the knots, Aisha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't just her hair, but her soul that was being untangled, healed. With each stroke of the brush, the past seemed to recede a little further. Meanwhile, Tariq walked through the mansion's corridors, the echo of his footsteps filling the void. He noticed the difference in the servants' faces. The tension in their shoulders had vanished, replaced by a more upright posture, a spark of hope in their eyes. They greeted him with a more sincere reverence, a respect that seemed to come from the heart and not from fear. He passed by the dining room, the door now open, sunlight flooding the space where darkness had reigned for so long. The table, once the stage for a grim judgment, now seemed to await a new beginning. He headed to his study, a sanctuary of thoughts and decisions. He sat in his chair, the weight of the mantle of responsibility on his shoulders still present, but now mingled with a sense of renewed purpose. Justice had been delivered, but Tariq knew this was only the first step. The mansion needed to be purified not only of Zahra's presence, but of all the bitterness and distrust she had sown. Aisha needed time to heal, and he, Tariq, needed to rebuild his family's and his people's faith in his leadership. He closed his eyes, the images of his suffering mother and Zahra's cries of fury still echoing in his mind. The pain of his own blindness was a heavy burden. He had failed to protect the most important woman in his life, and that error would haunt him. But now he had a chance at redemption, to ensure that the mansion truly became a home of peace, honor, and respect. A soft knock on the door roused him from his thoughts. It was one of the guards who brought a message. "Sheikh, Lady Aisha wishes to see you." Tariq felt a warmth spread through his chest. His mother was calling for him. He stood, the determination in his eyes stronger than ever. The mansion's journey of healing began with her, with his mother, with the rebuilding of the family bonds that had been so cruelly severed. The future would be challenging. But for the first time in a long while, Tariq felt they were on the right path. The determination in Tariq's eyes was stronger than ever as he stood, answering his mother's call. He walked through the corridors, each step echoing the promise of a different future. The mansion seemed to retain the soft scent of incense and fresh flowers, a fragrance that was beginning to replace the heavy air of old. The few servants who crossed his path offered respectful bows, and their gazes no longer carried fear, but a mixture of relief and a silent curiosity about what the new day would bring. Upon reaching the door to Aisha's room, he hesitated for an instant, taking a deep breath. The soft sound of a distant lute melody, coming from somewhere in the mansion, seemed to cradle the air. He knocked lightly, and Fatima's gentle voice invited him in. The room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Aisha sat in a silk armchair, no longer hunched, but with a posture that denoted a newfound dignity. Fatima was by her side, delicately combing her hair. The ends were still uneven, a vivid reminder of the cruelty suffered, but the rest of the strands, now clean and soft, fell over her shoulders like a silver mantle. A small smile, though still fragile, adorned her lips. "Mother," Tariq said, his voice a whisper as he approached. Aisha lifted her eyes, and the sparkle in them was clearer than he had seen in years. "My son," she replied, her voice a little stronger, but still laden with a sweetness he had forgotten. She gestured to Fatima, who bowed and discreetly withdrew, closing the door with a soft click. Tariq knelt again beside his mother, taking her hands. They were still thin and marked by time, but the trembling had subsided. "How do you feel?" he asked, genuine concern etched on his face. "Light," she said, and a sigh escaped her lips, a sigh of pure liberation, as if a centuries-old weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "It's not just the comfort of this room, my son, but the peace that has returned to my heart. Your justice, Tariq, was not just for me, but for the entire mansion." He squeezed her hands. "The forgiveness you offer me is more than I deserve, Mother. I should have seen, I should have acted." Aisha touched his face again, her fingers cool but full of affection. "Do not blame yourself further, my son. The past is done. What matters is the present and the future, and now I feel we can build a worthy future." She paused, and a new gleam, one of purpose, appeared in her eyes. "That is why I asked to see you. There is much to be done here." Tariq looked at her, surprised. "What do you have in mind, Mother?" "The mansion needs more than just Zahra's absence. It needs life, care, a soul to guide it. The servants, my son, they suffered in silence for years, just as I did. They need to know that the cruelty is gone forever, that their homes are safe. I would like to oversee the restoration of order, to bring back the harmony that was lost. I would like to care for the well-being of all who serve in this house." Tariq felt a wave of pride and relief. His mother was not just healing, she was ready to reclaim her place, to be the matriarch the mansion so desperately needed. "It would be an honor, Mother. The mansion and I need your wisdom. Your presence will bring true healing to this place." Aisha smiled, a smile that reached her eyes, and the mansion seemed to light up even more. "There is also another matter," she continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "The women of Zahra's harem. They were brought under false promises, some forced to enter. They too deserve justice, the chance to choose their own paths, freedom if they so desire." Tariq nodded, his countenance serious. "You are right, Mother. I had already thought of this. No soul should be kept against their will. All will be treated with dignity and given the option to return to their families or find a new path. With the support of the household, Aisha squeezed his hands again, her gaze fixed on his. This is the sheikh I raised, just and honorable. May Allah guide you. He stood, helping her to her feet as well. Together, they walked to the window, watching the sun set over the gardens. Vibrant colors painted the sky, and the birdsong filled the air, a symphony of peace. Aisha, with an arm intertwined with Tariq's, seemed more upright, stronger. The sheikh felt that the true purification of the mansion was only just beginning, and this time he would not be blind. He would rebuild not only the walls, but the hearts, under the guidance and serene presence of his mother. The promise of a new dawn was not just a hope, but a reality blossoming with each passing moment. It brought with it a different light to the mansion. The sun's rays, once filtered by an atmosphere of fear, now bathed the corridors and courtyards with a pure, welcoming glow. The silence that was once oppressive gave way to a soft symphony of voices, the distant clinking of dishes in the kitchen, and the joyful birdsong that seemed to have returned to the gardens. Aisha, with a renewed energy that surprised everyone, began to weave the tapestry of healing for the mansion. She no longer confined herself to her chambers. Her steps, once hesitant, now resonated with purpose through the corridors. She spoke with each servant, not as a distant lady, but as a matriarch who cared. Her eyes, which had suffered so much, now radiated compassion and gratitude. She listened to their stories, offered words of comfort, and assured them that the era of cruelty had ended. Aisha personally oversaw the distribution of food and clothing, ensuring that everyone was treated with dignity and that their needs were met. The kitchen, once a place of anxiety, now vibrated with laughter and the aroma of spices. The gardens, neglected under Zara's dominion, began to be restored, colorful flowers blooming as a symbol of the renewal that permeated every corner of the estate. Tariq, observing his mother, felt his heart fill with a mixture of regret and immense pride. He watched her flourish, and with her, the mansion itself. He fulfilled his promise regarding the women of Zara's harem. Each was called, treated with respect, and heard. For those who wished to return to their families, Tariq provided safe caravans and generous dowries, ensuring they could restart their lives with dignity. Some, with nowhere to go or fearing the judgment of their villages, chose to remain in the mansion, receiving training in crafts and being integrated into the servant community with the promise of freedom and security. The mansion, once a labyrinth of secrets and oppression, was becoming a haven of hope. One afternoon, Tariq found Aisha sitting in the central courtyard, where a fountain gushed water at a tranquil, constant rhythm. She was surrounded by some of the women who had chosen to stay, teaching them the art of embroidery, her agile, experienced fingers guiding the colorful threads. The soft sound of their voices and occasional laughter filled the air. "Mother," Tariq said, approaching. Aisha lifted her eyes, a genuine smile illuminating her face. "My son, see how quickly they learn." He sat beside her, observing the women. "The mansion is different, Mother. It breathes again." "It breathes with the soul that has been returned to it, Tariq," she replied, her eyes fixed on the tapestry in her hands. "The soul of compassion, justice, and respect. You did this, my son. You purified this place." Tariq took her hand, feeling the softness of her skin. "We did this, Mother. Your wisdom and strength guided the way. I was blind for too long, but now I see, and I promise that darkness will never again take hold of this home." Aisha squeezed his hand. "May Allah bless your journey, my sheikh. May justice and honor always be your guides." Days turned into weeks, and Tariq's mansion flourished. The scars of the past did not completely disappear, but they were covered by new layers of hope and harmony. Aisha, the restored matriarch, walked with the dignity of a queen, her hair, now growing evenly, a symbol of her resilience. Tariq, the sheikh who learned to see, governed with a wisdom and empathy that made him beloved by his people. The mansion, which one day was a stage for cruelty and suffering, had transformed into a beacon of peace, a true home where justice prevailed and family love reigned supreme. The echo of children's laughter now playing in the gardens, the whisper of prayers of gratitude, and the soft murmur of the fountain in the central courtyard were the melody of a rewritten future, a promise fulfilled.